I'm going to start the meeting formally here. Thank you all for showing up. This is the joint SABR AL chapter meeting. We have people here. Hopefully, I didn't keep track of everyone from all 5 AL Central chapters: Kansas City, Minneapolis, Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland. Cleveland, the Guardians, who, as I said to somebody, what would Cleveland's management do with the Tigers' money? It's scary to think.
Is there a flip side of that? What would the Tigers management do with the Guardians' talent, or do we not go down that path?
I think
you open this door.
I think the problem with the Tigers is no longer not developing talent. I think the problem is the talent. I mean, it's Baez, it's Orkelson, it's, well, of course they signed Urshela. Anyway, I shouldn't be talking about Detroit. So thank you all for coming. We're going to have a 5 to 10 minute intro period here where I'm going to ask one person from each chapter to speak for a minute or so, and or so means like no more than 2 minutes, about the first half of the season. And then it's going to be open mic night. So if you got poetry, you got performance art, you got comedy routine, we're open for everything. In case of those of you who don't know, I'm Gary Gillette. I'm the president and the founder of the Southern Michigan chapter. That is, I founded the Detroit chapter, which we merged the Southern Michigan chapter. This is, I think, our fourth joint meeting.
Correct.
The previous ones have gone pretty well, I thought. So we're going to try it again. And as far as for introducing the teams, we're going to go in the order they finished the first half in, which means Joe Shaw of Cleveland is going to get to serenade us with all the cool things Cleveland did right. I'm jealous.
Okay, well, thank you, Gary. My name is Joe Shaw. I'm the president of the Jack Graney chapter in Cleveland. And when Gary reached out, certainly we want to be part of this. And I drafted 4 pages of things we just had to say tonight. And then I read the fine print of Gary's email and said, wait, 1 to 2 minutes. Uh-oh. Okay, so we're going to try to hit some high points. And there are a lot of positive points for the Guardians, obviously, but there are some not so positive points. And in the conversational part, hopefully we can get into some more of them. But I think the byline of the first half for the Cleveland Guardians is, did anybody see this coming? Especially after the way we finished last season. We lost our Hall of Fame of the future manager. We only made 2 trades in the offseason, had to get rid of a pitcher to free up money to get a new pitcher. Management said we got no money to spend. Had a pretty putrid offense last year, but we are going to ride our starting pitching as far as we could go. And so as we sit here at the interim point, with the best record in the American League and second only to the Phillies in all of baseball, you can say, well, there must have been things that went right, and absolutely right. Starting with the Guardians went on the road for the first 10 games. Not an easy way to start your season, but they had no choice because of the progressive field upgrades. And apparently they didn't read all of the articles and listen to the various commentators saying, boy, at best we can hope for this year is a 500 season. They started out 8-2. And frankly, they've kind of never looked back. They've had a few 3-game losing streaks, but they've always been able to get the ship righted. The starting pitching, which was going to be the strength, has turned out to be not the strength. We lost after 2 starts. The prime pitcher, Shane Bieber, due to Tommy John surgery. The other 2 starting pitchers with experience, Logan Allen and Tristan McKenzie, have been sent back to the minors for different reasons. So we're operating on less than championship quality starting pitching. But the bullpen has proven in the first half, and the metrics back it up, to be the best bullpen in not just the American League, but in baseball, with 4 of the top 5 relievers having ERAs under 3, and the worst of the 5, a paltry 3.54. Emmanuel Clase, arguably the best, if not one of the best relief pitchers, closers in the game, with Only 3 blown saves this year in comparison to last year when Terry Francona was forced to overwork him. He had 13 blown saves. So we can talk about the starting pitching and say we need help on the starting pitching side, but on the relief side, a bullpen that has been the best of the best in the first half. The offense has frankly been a very big surprise to a lot of people. The Guardians were near the bottom last year, and they're in the top third this year. And there are many different metrics we could say and talk about. They got a little bit of a dry spell in the week or so before the All-Star game, but hopefully a little bit of rest and relaxation will get them righted. So the offense has certainly been something to behold. And I think there's some players we need to quickly mention. The heart and soul of the team, Jose Ramirez, a man that's underappreciated, but on a trajectory to yearly be in the final conversation and voting for AL MVP, on his way, in my opinion, to having his number retired by the Guardians, and hopefully a strong candidate for the Hall of Fame if he continues on this trajectory. He is the heart and soul of the team. Young Stephen Kwan in left field, rapidly becoming a fan favorite, leading the American League in batting. A little bit uptick in his power numbers this year. Excellent fielder. Again, a person that the fans have fallen in love with and has produced at a high level. Then we've got our blue collar slugger and our first baseman. And certainly he is a person that we all love and respect. And then the closer, Emmanuel Clase, we already talked about him, but another person who deserves some time and attention momentarily is our versatile player, David Fry. And he is a person who's played many positions. He was a player to be named later in a trade a while back that the Guardians executed, and certainly he ended up in the All-Star game this year. As John Smoltz said, the All-Star nobody knew anything about, but he produced in that All-Star game. And so we've got a cadre of strong players on the offensive side. In the bullpen, we're hoping to get some strength at the trading deadline in starting pitching. And I think the thing that I would close with, and hopefully staying within your 2-minute guideline, Gary, is that the fans are really into this team. Attendance is up 20% over last year. And it's not just the numbers, but it's the enthusiasm and the engagement. And being a season ticket holder, it is exciting to go to the game, see the people coming early, staying through the end of the game, engaged in the game throughout, even if the Guardians are trailing in the 9th inning, because they have proven to be a resilient team. And so we're excited about what the second half will bring. We've got, I believe it's a 4.5 game lead over the Twins, but we think it's going to be an exciting second half. The Guardians have over 40 of their remaining 60 plus games at home. So certainly a schedule from home and away that favors us. And so we're excited about the second half and excited about hopefully the opportunity to get in the playoffs. And before I turn the mic back to you, Gary, the first baseman I was talking with about, and I didn't name, was obviously Josh Naylor. And I apologize for that, our blue collar first baseman, designated hitter. So the Guardians, again, finish where I started. Who would have ever seen this coming in the offseason and the beginning of the season? But the Cleveland fans are enjoying the hell out of this first half of the season and hopefully the remainder of the season.
Okay, we're getting background noise. I'm going to mute everybody. You can unmute yourself, but I'm muting everyone to cut the background noise out. Okay. Joe, you were nowhere near 2 minutes. I love listening to you, but I want to get into the freewheeling stuff. But of course, Cleveland has so much to talk about. Anyway, the Twins are up next. Gene, are you going to speak for the Twins?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Have at it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. And see some fellow Halsey Hall, Minnesota members out there. And I appreciate the support, and we should have a fun second half. The Twins were picked by almost everyone to take the division. Some people were wise so far to take the field if they were betting, because Cleveland, of course, has gone out and stayed out in front so far. The Twins have had some good and not so good winning streaks and losing streaks this year. They're inconsistent. They'll roll off 5-6 wins in a row, then drop 4 or 5 games in a row. They've had some real good things happen, such as one thing we were holding our fingers crossed about was Byron Buxton in center field. And in the season preview, John Buckeye and I talked about how the Twins were going to depend on their hitting this year because after they lost Sonny Gray to free agency. So the hitting has come through pretty well. Ironically, Pablo Lopez has not duplicated what he did last year, but the Twins as a starting staff and as a relief bullpen staff have produced. So they've been in most of their games. They have a winning record. They're about 4.5 games behind. As I said, Byron Buxton is on a path to play more than 100 games, which wasn't guaranteed looking ahead this year. The relief pitcher that they're happy about is Jorge Alcala, the mid reliever. He's solidified the middle part of the bullpen. And even though Duran, the closer, hasn't piled up as many saved as Emmanuel Clase has, he still throws 100 miles an hour and is a threat. And he should actually ramp it up this year. Looking forward to him doing well. Another hitter that I believe is hitting over 300 or close to it is Jose Miranda. He wasn't really expected. He was sort of on and off the roster last year. So overall, the Twins, I think, are in a good shape to challenge Cleveland. We don't know whether they're going to do much at the deadline. They usually sort of lay back and don't make big moves at the deadline. So we'll see what happens. But we're pretty optimistic in the Twin City. And hopefully maybe by the time SABR 52 rolls into Minneapolis, Minnesota and Cleveland will be going head to head for the division lead in August. So that's all I have to say.
Gene, thank you. I admit the Twins are doing well. Again, I'm jealous. So I'm going to be very brief on Detroit because we're already over my 10-minute introduction period. For those of you who tuned in early, we discussed how the Tigers are sort of betwixt and between. You know, they have obviously a budding star in Cole Keith, who they have trusted to stay in the majors rather than sending him down when he was, not hitting, and his defense was really ragged. Although his defense is improving, they're still not convinced he can play second base. At least not everyone is. Spencer Torkelson has been a complete bust and a very big disappointment. They have left him in Toledo as a message to him. I'm convinced that he needs to listen more and not be so confident. He does not have a guaranteed job. They had a great pitching staff at the start of the year. That's come back to earth. Pretty sure they're going to flip. Pretty sure they're going to flip Jack Flaherty and Carson Kelly. They thought they made smart acquisitions in Gio Urshela and Mark Canha. Now they don't look so good. People are waiting for them to bring up Jace Young to play third base. Javi Baez is a train wreck. As I was saying, I think if he doesn't improve by the end of the year, they should just bite the bullet and release him to show the fans that money isn't everything. In the outfield, Riley Green is a joy to watch. Kerry Carpenter being on the injured list is really hurt. They need Jason Foley to return to his closer peak of the first 2 months of the season. He's been sort of ragged since then. They lost Alex Lang, last year's closer. And what am I missing? Oh, and Parker Meadows has been a disappointment. He was completely outclassed, went to Toledo, did well, and then came back and was immediately injured. So things looked pretty bleak 2 weeks ago. And then they went and won 8 out of 10, and people are now optimistic. And of course, the Tigers aren't as good as they look now. They looked in the last 10 games when they were beating the Dodgers and the Reds and the Guardians, and they weren't as bad as they looked before that streak. I expect them to sell and flip players at the break. Scott Harris is really smart and a master trader, in my view. The problem is they have to have the core, and I don't see they have it yet. So 8:15, I'm done with the Tigers. I've got the Royals and the White Sox, and I'm going to ask them to be brief, not because you're sucking canal water. I'm interested in all the team, but because I want to really get people to have open discussion. So, Roger, I think you're going to do KC, right? Let me check to make sure Roger's still on. I don't see him. Is anyone else going to talk about KC? I muted everyone to keep the background noise, so you can unmute yourself. All right, we're going to go then to the White Sox, and we'll pick up KC when Roger comes back on. I saw him get out and then come back and out and come back. So,
This is
hey,
okay. So this is Richard for the White Sox. I'll be quick. So the White Sox were expected to be bad this year, probably not this bad. Currently, they have the worst record in baseball by a mile, and they are on pace to finish with the worst record in franchise history, which they will almost easily obtain. And their winning percentage puts them on a pace for 45 wins, which would put them just ahead of the 2003 Tigers. So that's the overview as far as what happened offensively. In a nutshell, this is probably going to go down on any kind of adjustment basis as the worst offense in White Sox history. Right now, they're averaging 3.2 runs per game, and there's only 5 teams in franchise history that scored less. And one of them was in 1968, the year of the pitcher, and the other 4 were in the dead ball era. So this is just, once you do any adjustments, you find out this is really just been a bad offense, and that's been the main reason for problems, but there have been supplementary problems. The defense is the worst in baseball, and at the start of the year, they made some acquisitions with the idea of, okay, we'll get defense only players, and that didn't really work out. A lot of those guys, didn't provide any offense as promised, but then didn't provide defense. And they're only really getting decent defense from Louis Robert, Corey Lee, and Nicky Lopez. Everybody else is kind of not good at it. A key problem is the bullpen, which the Cleveland was talking about, having the best bullpen in baseball. The Sox have one of the worst. And the White Sox bullpen leads the majors with 24 blown saves.
yeah.
And some of these were bad. There's sometimes you're going to get blown saves where, you take a 1-run lead in the top of the 7th and you lose the game, and that counts as a blown save. No, I'm talking, we played 2 games against the Cubs where we had 5-run leads in both games that the starting staff turned over in it with a chance for the starter to win the game, and we lost both of those types of blown leads. It's just been brutal on that front. So, now, the one positive is arguably the White Sox actually have one of the better starting rotations in baseball. Part of that, of course, they have Garrett Crochet, an all-star pitcher leading in the league in strikeouts, one of the best pitchers in baseball. But really, Eric Fetty has done almost as well. That was a free agent acquisition. And they've been fiddling with the rotation a little bit, but the last month or so, they've settled with Chris Flexen, another free agent who's been doing suitable work. Not great, but he's been suitable as kind of a third starter. And then prospect Drew Thorpe, who they got from the Padres for Dylan Cease, who's really been good. His last 4 starts have been good. And then rounded off kind of, whatever, if you want to say the 5th starter is Jonathan Cannon, who was a 3rd-round draft choice for the White Sox 2 years ago, who rapidly developed and he's had some exceptional starting performances and some so-so ones, but really the starting rotation has been more than decent. So the next 2 weeks actually are really big for the White Sox, depending on who is traded, because almost certainly Fetty, Tommy Pham, Paul DeYoung will be dealt. But the big focus, even in baseball, is on whether or not Garrett Crochet and or Louis Robert will be dealt. And that's going to depend on what they can get back. I mean, the one positive for the White Sox is in the offseason, they did bring Brian Bannister on board, who's been roving around and helping the minor league pitchers, and he's really good. And between him and the guy who's headed the draft, Mike Shirley, who's been getting some good position, they've been doing an excellent job of acquiring minor league pitching talent to the point that the pitching helped them win a couple of first half minor league titles, that like Canapolis was good, Birmingham was good. And so the question is, can this acquisition of pitching talent help them to a position where maybe in 2 years they can start being competitive again? I'm out.
Thanks, Rich. I commiserate with you. I mean, Detroit, we've been in the wilderness for so long. It's painful to see how bad the Sox are, especially when the wounds are largely self-inflicted, I think. Okay, so we are now an open mic. If Roger gets back on, Roger Erickson, or anyone from the Kansas City chapter wants to do a quick summary of the Royals first half, they should message me in the chat, and then we'll take a pause. But otherwise, we're an open mic. So who would like to lead off?
This is Richard. I'll take it, just following up on something that I've found really interesting, because I don't think it's just the White Sox, but I noticed, like I said, typically, if I had told you 10 or 15 years ago, well, the Sox had one of the best starting rotations in baseball, there's no way that would have been linked to, they're on pace to possibly having the worst record over. And I think this has changed. And even listening to Joe talk about Cleveland, and there's the expectations where, well, maybe the starting staff can carry us, and it didn't. And in fact, it's the bullpen that's really pulled Cleveland through, to the point that I'm wondering, even going forward, is that a development track that teams are going to have to start looking at, like even with the draft? Because even we just had the major league draft, and with pitchers, there's still a focus on, okay, who can start, who can give us 5 or 6 innings. And it's like, there's not as much attention played to, okay, who can give us 1 or 2 innings consistently every other day, because it's beginning really look like that's more important in baseball. Having, a ton of guys, having 4 or 5 guys who aren't starters, but maybe every other day can pitch an inning or 2 for you and not blow up. And it seems like the teams that have that depth are the ones that do better. That's
an interesting point. I guess I would predict that sooner or later, probably sooner, we're going to see a re-emphasis on starting pitching, because I think when you look at the things that make baseball unpopular, like all the strikeouts, the shift, the slowness of the game, which the pitch clock is thankfully solved. Not that we didn't know 10 years ago it would solve it. It did. We knew that, they just couldn't do it. I think an endless parade of indistinguishable relief pitchers who people don't know, who aren't built into stars like starting pitchers, and who the fans won't come out to see. It's just another guy who throws 98 or 100 or 102 with a strong right arm, who will be replaced by someone from Toledo or the AAA club when he blows out his arm or goes on the IL. I just think that's hurting the game's popularity. You need marketable stars, and marketable stars are starting pitchers, not relief pitchers. Good points, Rich. John Buckeye, I think you were next. You can unmute yourself. I thought I thought I had somebody to let in.
Cool. I'll lower my hand then. I just, wanted to follow up on a little bit of what Gene's summary of the Twins was. It was good. I think it's also worth noting for us how good a timing this All-Star break has become, just from like an injury perspective and kind of a getting guys on board perspective. I mean, Pablo has shown signs of getting back to his old self, and like if he's anything like his Venezuelan compatriot Johan, watch out in the second half. So there's that. But then there's also Lewis to get healthy, Carlos Correa to get healthy, Miranda to get healthy. Buxton might have even had like a crash out in San Francisco. So hopefully that's not too long of a stint either. But it's just like, man, what a time to have 5 days with no games, and you just don't even have to put some of these guys on the IL. But yeah, just wondering if there are any other teams we got here that are thankful for the break coming when it did.
Well, I think in the Tigers' case, they probably wish it didn't interrupt their momentum, but I'm sure that players need a break. I mean, we all know it's a long season and incredibly grueling. But we'll see what other people say. Robert, you had your hand up. You're unmute yourself. Actually, I can do it.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
no.
just to expand on yours and Richard's point though about starting pitching though. I mean, look at the excitement the other day over Paul Skenes starting for the
Right.
National League. I mean, I can't, you know, this is outside of the division though, but still, you know, I think it's on point though, you know, to say if you want people to, you know, pay attention to baseball more and the All-Star game, and the new talent coming up though, you know, people like Paul Skenes are the future here though, and I can't remember the last time a rookie started an All-Star game for either league.
Yeah, it's been a while. Mark Fidrich, didn't Fidrich start as a rookie but I don't know if he's the most recent. We have people out there who will check and tell us. But I couldn't agree with you more. Mark Patterson, Valenzuela. The starting pitching has been historically, along with big sluggers, has been the attraction of the game, right? People appreciate a finely turned double play. They appreciate a good relief pitcher. They appreciate guys on the bases, but they come to see the starting pitcher and they come to see the sluggers. And baseball's eliminated one of its prime attractions by this, the apotheosis of the bullpens. Joe, you have something to say, I'm sure.
I'm just going to make a comment about the starting pitching and Paul Skenes. I mean, what an incredible young man, and given where baseball is, how sad it is that you've seen some things from Pittsburgh saying, well, the Tommy John watch is on. How long until at the way he throws, how hard he throws, until we'll lose him to Tommy John surgery. I was at a Pirates game this summer, and that conversation was going on. And I guess it's just a part of today's game, right? You throw hard, you throw 100 pitches, you eventually have to retool your arm. High probability. Well, of course,
there are a lot of guys undergoing TJ who aren't throwing 100 pitches. There are a lot of relief pitchers who are undergoing TJ too.
That's very true.
Yeah.
This September is actually the 50th anniversary of the original Tommy John surgery, and it's actually almost become a matter of course now. I mean, I can't tell you how many pitchers we see. I mean, even down to the high school level who are undergoing it.
Right. In fact, there are people who voluntarily undergo TJ early in their career, in their amateur career, to avoid it later interrupting. I don't know how many. There have been rumors that a lot of kids are doing that, and of course, you can't know without seeing their medical reports. That's a scary thought. Somebody, Seymour here, is looking for the raise hand feature.
Okay, Aaron just told me it's under reactions. I'm still not finding it. You just call on me whenever it's my turn. Consider my hand raised.
Well, go ahead. I don't have any. I don't see any other raised hands right now.
Okay. Well, I enjoy the schedule that we don't get the White Sox or the Tigers or all of the division teams in 9 times, but Cleveland's a team I've kind of come to enjoy watching some of their players. Quan out of Oregon State, and then to Joe and Dave. Hi, Dave. It's good to see you again. Jimenez, is that how he says it? Jimenez. He's the guy I've just enjoyed watching the last few years. It seems like kind of an underrated player. Still having a good year, maybe not what he did a couple of years ago, but if the Cleveland people could talk about him a little bit.
Well, he obviously is one of the guys that came over from New York in the Lindor trade. So everybody is really happy to see him. But, you know, uh, they signed him to an extension, but it's starting to look like the team has a glut of middle infielders, especially since they just drafted Travis Bazzana first overall. He's ostensibly a second baseman. And it sounds like they're going to at least try to keep him as an infielder. But, you know, that's kind of been, you know, one of the things that everybody's been really pleased with. I mean, I think most Guardians fans in their heart of hearts knew that they, you know, there was no way they were going to get equal value for Lindor. But, you know, I think they're pretty pleased with Jimenez.
And I think Vince, not only his offense, but his defense is top tier.
Right.
His defense is top tier at second base, and probably eventually, as you said, shortstop with the recent #1 drafting of the Guardians.
Yes,
Is
Steven
that
Johnson.
where he gets a lot of his WAR? And I was surprised to see him up there on WAR a couple of years ago, but that's where it comes in the field.
Well, I guess I don't know it that well, Stu, but I certainly it's a significant contributor. But he did have a better offensive year a year or two ago than he's having right now. He's good.
Yes.
He's good, but I think it's not as good as he was before. But his glove has been consistently outstanding.
I mean,
Okay.
he's won 2 straight Gold Gloves, and he's gunning for a third this year.
Okay,
He's a joy to watch.
Steven Johnson has been waiting patiently. Steven?
I want to pick up on what both Richard and Vince mentioned was the draft. And if there's been an Achilles heel to the Guardians/Indians in the last 30 years, it's been the draft. They've gotten lucky fewer times than they've bombed. Article this morning in the paper by Jim Ingram, in which he mentioned the same thing that Vince did, that they wasted their draft on middle infielders when they should have been looking for power and more pitching.
I am delighted to hear you talk about Jim, because I also work for the Chronicle. So I'm thrilled to know that there are people out there reading him.
Yeah.
And that's frankly where I got a lot of this from, because I know he was real high on Charlie Condon.
Yeah. That was one of the points he made. So, you know, is this going to pay off? Well, if we look at the Indians/Guardians historically, no. But there's hope springs eternal. So we shall hope.
Well, and the good news is, I mean, a team like the Guardians doesn't have to hit on their first round draft picks. I mean, there was definitely a streak in the early to mid 2000s when, I mean, they did not hit on their first round picks. But baseball is a little different from football and basketball. You do not expect immediate contributions from your draft picks in baseball like you do in other sports. And also, definitely you're looking at first round draft picks contributing more in football and basketball than in baseball. You know, you want to talk about a draft where the Indians nailed it. 2016, I think they ended up picking 3 pitchers who were all in the starting rotation within 2 or 3 years. And they might have struck gold again with Williams and Bibee.
Yeah.
Kirk Weber. I'm going to let Kirk talk here because he's had his hand up for a bit. Kirk?
This would be addressed to either my White Sox or the Tigers. If any of the team issues could be addressed at the trade deadline, what would either of those 2 teams address first?
Richard, do you want to take the White Sox?
Well, I mean, the Sox need position players. So, I mean, first of all, it sounded like the Indian representatives on this call didn't want Bazzana. So we'll take them. You don't want them, we'll take them. That's fine. But like, you know, we could use a ton of players like that. The issue is, will teams trade their top position prospects for pitching. And I think that's one of the issues right now, because there was rumors that the New York Yankees would really like Garrett Crochet. But when approached with, okay, well, this guy's under control for 3 years. He's great. He's leading the league in strikeouts. It's clear this is an elite pitcher. We want your top position prospect who's like a top 100 outfielder in baseball. Oh no, you can't have him. We don't want that. We want to give you this second rate. We want a discount. Well, tough. So I mean, but what we need position players. We need especially, I mean, outfielders would really help more than anything, but bats, outfielders, we kind of, from our system, there's a good chance we can fill middle infielders and the catchers, but I think primarily for the White Sox, it would be outfielders.
I had an interesting view of the Major League Draft, and of course, they always say, what does every team need? And they list it. It seemed to me like 25 of the 30 teams needed left-handed pitching. And what did the Sox draft? Left-handed pitching. I think to the extent the Sox have a plan, is to try and stock up on pitching and trade for the position players that they aren't developing through their system. Frankly, there's no outfielder in this system is even a replacement player at this point. So, like Richard said, there's some prospects for catcher and for middle infield, but for the outfield, they're just going to have to draft pitchers, get rid of them fast, and hope they can strike gold with an outfielder.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the strategy of drafting players to trade them is a risky one. Dave Dombrowski ended up in that mode in his last few years in Detroit, where he wasn't drafting people to bring them to the Tigers and play them. He was drafting them for trade bait, and to some extent it worked, but I don't think that's a long-term philosophy. I don't think you build a club with that philosophy. The Tigers, of course, have lots of prime trade bait. I should have mentioned in my summary, of course, that Skubal has been absolutely brilliant. He is such a dominant pitcher, and he seems so fundamentally sound and grounded in terms of his attitude that it's hard to imagine what his ceiling is. So the not big debate, but the big question is whether the Tigers might trade him to make a big move if they're not going to be in contention in the next few years. Personally, I don't think they're going to trade him. I was discussing that in the pre-game before the meeting opened, and I forgot to reiterate that, of course, the talk radio guys love to talk about whether you should trade Skubal or not. I don't really think the Tigers do. I'm not saying somebody couldn't overwhelm them with an offer, but I don't think that's going to happen. So the Tigers are going to, I'm sure, flip Flaherty unless his back flares up again. They're going to, they're not going to get caught short like they did with Eduardo Rodriguez last year. That was a real failure on the part of the management. They're also going to, I'm sure, flip Kelly and try to get something, I presume, for Ken. I hope that Ken gets hot in the next 2 weeks. It looks more like he did the first 2 months of the season, and maybe even Urshela. Harris is very big on not letting mediocre veterans block the path of prospects you need to see whether they're going to make it in the major leagues. So they're going to be part of your future. And I think that he would like to get Jace Young up there to see whether Young is part of the solution or whether it's going to take another year or two to develop. The Tigers, might make some other minor deals, but I think those are, those are the big trade issues. Aaron, you've been patient, so we're going to give you a chance to mouth off.
Yeah, sure. I'm a Halsey hauler, and I'm in the Twin Cities, but I actually wanted to ask a question for the Cleveland folks. So as someone who is hoping the Twins can overcome the deficit and be crowned division champs, what if that happens? If Cleveland does not win the division, what do you think would have gone wrong? Where is there some softness? Who's playing out of their mind? Who's punching above their weight? Where is there a chance? Where should I be looking for hope that maybe someone's going to drop off or part of the team might be weaker than it looks? It's been unreal so far, so I'm curious.
Well, I think a number of us probably have our perspectives, and I hope we could all share them. Several Jack Graney members on, but from my perspective, it's starting pitching. They can't afford a second half of starting pitching like they had in the first half, or the bullpen will be burned out. That would be my thing. Vince, your perspective?
No, that's precisely it. Obviously the bullpen has been lights out, but and I feel like there's a lot of Cleveland fans that still remember how well Terry Francona used the bullpen in 2016 in particular, in the postseason, but eventually everybody ran out of gas because there's only so much you can do with what
Only so
amounted to
much
a two and
gas.
a half man rotation. But and the Guardians at this point are throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. They just dealt for Spencer Howard, who did not acquit himself well in his first start for the Guardians. They got what's his name, Boyd, who's going to come back in another, I don't know, 3 weeks once he finishes rehabbing another Tommy John surgery injury. So they are really in a bad spot with starting pitching. And every button that Stephen Vogt is pushing seems to work so far, but the question is, how sustainable is it? Because the other thing too, and I think everybody here knows this, is at the end of the year, it's not who's the best team, but who is able to get hot at the right time and sustain it. I mean, you've seen a lot of players, you've seen a lot of teams that, kind of, nudge their way into the postseason and then get hot and end up winning a World Series. We saw it last year with Texas. So that was, it comes down to starting pitching, just like Joe said.
Mr. Bodmer and Scott, you have any offer there?
I'm gonna go to Tom, who hasn't had a chance to speak yet. Tom, how do you say your last name? Steich?
He's muted.
Yeah, I can unmute him.
Longtime Cleveland fan. I'm 80.5 years old. I just want to live long enough to see the Indians win the World Series. In 1971, I took a job in Annapolis and told all my friends in Cleveland, I'm moving in exile until the Indians win the World Series. 54 years later, I'm still here in Annapolis and I'm running out of years, but
still in exile.
You gotta hope. Besides the pitching problem, one of the reasons they did so well the first half was to hit like crazy in a clutch. And that's not going to last all year. And their batting average and man on base is starting to come down. So one of the issues is, well, you can't expect the team to hit like they did in the first half for the rest of the year. And unless we get some starting pitching, I don't know where we're going to get the starting pitching without having to make a trade. And the Indians Guardians don't like to do that because you're giving up talent that you can't afford to lose. So it's going to be a iffy second half of the season.
I want to interject my personal experience here. I covered the 97 World Series. It was the first World Series where we had a pitch-by-pitch webcast, very crude by contemporary standards, but it was the first one ever, and I did it. And I have to tell you, watching the Marlins pull that series out and beat the Indians was just heartbreaking to me, because I knew that if the Indians won, everyone would emulate the Indians, and that would be good for the game. And if the Marlins won, people would emulate the Marlins, which would be terrible for baseball. And the Marlins won. I wasn't even a Cleveland fan. I wasn't a Cleveland fan. It's just heartbreaking to see an organization that did the right thing lose like that. And then, because people in baseball are shameless copiers, the teams that win are the teams that everyone tries to follow, especially back then before the rise of analytics. And it just was a terrible experience watching the Marlins win. One of the worst things that happened to baseball in the modern era. Stephen Johnson has something else to say.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is looking at the second half schedule. on paper right now, it looks like is a little tougher than the first half. And combined with the other things that have been mentioned, especially the starting pitching, I'm afraid, you know, if they get 2 or 3 series in a row where they're 1 for 3 or 1 for 4, they could be out of it fairly quickly.
Yeah, I'm laughing at the comment that I saw it go by. I don't see who made it. So it's Edwin Offit. There's no point in time where the Marlins have been good for baseball. I agree.
And the 97 Indians are a really good example of a team that wasn't very good because, I mean, the White Sox ran up the white flag at the trade deadline, but the Indians just got hot in September and it carried over into October. And again, it could only go so far.
Right. But of course, they were also playing a team that was, in essence, a train wreck that got lucky. Gee, I'm gonna pursue this a little bit more because I'm going to say that in Philadelphia, I was living in Philadelphia at the time. There were rumors that Eric Gregg had been paid off to throw that division series game where Livan Hernandez, we had a strike zone 3 feet wide for Livan Hernandez. I never believed that, but there are people who years later still believe that Greg was on the take in that game, and you know that without that game and without the Marlins overachieving, that that World Series looked completely different, and it was just one of the worst things that could happen to baseball is the Marlins made it to the World Series and then won, and that they beat a club who did things the right way in Cleveland, even if they weren't a great team. So Mark Patterson, my friend, says Cleveland is the only team to lose 2 World Series Game 7s in extra innings. Yeah, 2016 was a heartbreaker too. I don't have to tell you people in Cleveland. I watched that game and I wanted to cry when the Cubs came back and win.
This is no longer fun for me.
Since then?
Oh, talking about this.
Oh, talking about it. I'm sorry. I'm gonna. There's more comments in the chat about what I was saying about the Marlins, but that's sort of outside of our purview here. So I'm going to go to Rich has got a comment, and then we'll go to Dave Scott. Rich, you got to unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, I did. Okay, just the only thing I was going to comment is there's been all this discussion about the Twins and the Guardians and and just how it's beginning to look like we are amazingly fortunate with the SABR Conference having those games that weekend. That may turn out to be very big. And there's, in fact, a doubleheader on Friday of the SABR Conference because of a rained out game. So there's the SABR game on the Friday night, but also that afternoon, there's also a Twins Guardians game taking place in Target Field. Just mentioning. So that's 4 games over that 3 days. Very pivotal. So just put me down as being excited about that. So.
Yeah, I think everyone's looking forward to Minneapolis. I'm hoping that I can make it at the last minute right now. I'm not scheduled to go. Dave Scott, you had your hand up. You have something you want to say? Okay, I don't know what happened to Dave, but presumably he'll come back. Bruce?
First of all, I'd like to say that the rest of the division ought to thank Chicago for their contributions and success on the field. I think Chicago has contributed a lot more than the minor league systems of the various other teams to their success this year. The Sox surprisingly have done well against Cleveland, much better than the other teams in the division. Yeah. And there's absolutely no explaining from Chicago fans or from Chicago experts why that could possibly be. Do you Cleveland guys have any idea why the Sox are at least mediocre against Cleveland?
I mean, that happens. The Guardians have won an awful lot of games that they had no business winning, but they've lost an awful lot of games that they've had no business losing, and it feels like they've all been to the White Sox.
Yeah.
Also, if we're talking about the SABR conference, Thursday at 3 o'clock, I'll be presenting. It's the 50th anniversary of 10-cent beer night. June was anyway.
That's right. That's right. So let's see here. Hang on. I guess Gene, go ahead. I'm sort of depending on the little yellow raised hands, but go ahead.
Thank you. I think we've been neglecting a very surprising team in our own division, the Royals. They have, I think, more than exceeded expectations, and even more than Cleveland has exceeded expectations. They're maybe 7 games behind Cleveland right now, and Bobby Witt Jr. is regarded as one of the big young guns in the whole league, maybe on a par with Gunnar Henderson. And so I really think that, talking about teams doing it the right way, I think the KC Royals are doing it the right way. And so I'd like to see them not catch the Twins, but maybe fall right behind the Twins after the Twins overtake the Guardians at the end. So, but I hope they do well, just simply because they've been a good, huge surprise. And if someone else has a little more detail about the Royals roster, take over.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gene, that the Royals are a big surprise and maybe a bigger surprise than the Guardians. But unfortunately, we don't have anyone from Kansas City to speak. Roger Erickson was on early, and then he was out and then back on. I think I admitted him 3 times. I don't know what happened. And I don't apparently have anyone else from the chapter who I'm going to check here. I don't know many people from the Cleveland chapter, or the Kansas City chapter. But if anyone wants to opine or wax wise or rhapsodic about the Royals, please do. Go ahead, Gene.
Plus, another exciting aspect of the Royals, didn't they just draft Jack Caglione from Florida? He's the big pitcher, two-way player and I'm sure he'll be just as good as Shohei. Just kidding. But he's a really talked about player all during this past college season. And of course, they made it to the College World Series, hit some home runs. Anyway, he's a highly popular, marketable player, that got picked by the Royals this year, I believe.
Yeah. Joe, you had hand up for a bit.
Yeah, I'm just going to make a comment. We're talking a lot about players for obvious reasons, but I think another dimension that I'm interested in watching in the second half for the Guardians is the Guardians manager, Stephen Vogt. He's done very well, and I think he's endeared himself not only to the players, to the fans, but he hasn't really been tested yet. And a lengthy losing streak, perhaps overtaken by the Twins as the second half plays out. I'm very interested in watching how he performs. I think he's going to do very well, and I think Cleveland really signed an outstanding, manager candidate who's turning into a manager in real time. But I think it's going to be very interesting to watch him in the second half as he gets tested, which he will.
Yeah, I'm impressed with how well Vogt has done. I mean, he was filling really big shoes. I think it's really hard to come in after a legend like that and win over the fans quickly. And it seems like he's done that, at least from the Detroit perspective. Rich, you have something else you want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, as far as Kansas City, of course, Bobby Witt's been terrific, and Sal Perez has had a renaissance season. So that's kind of, their offense has been decent as a result. But really, what's driven them is they've got the best starting rotation in baseball by any metric. You look at it, Cole Ragans and Seth Lugo's been, this reliever turned starter. Is it Brady Singer? I mean, it's like you look at it, it's nobody you've heard of, but the rotation is really good, and that's what's driven them.
Okay, Bruce.
Yeah, I think the talk about the Caglione draft was very interesting, because when the White Sox came up to the draft, If they wanted a pitcher, it was clearly going to be Wahagan Smith. If they wanted to try and develop power hitting left-handers, which they haven't had since literally Robin Ventura, they were going to draft Caglione. And the fact that they drafted Smith, the left-handed pitcher, shows that they've essentially given up, I think, on developing with high draft choices position outfielders. Again, I'm not saying that's the right or the wrong decision.
Yeah, it's just
it is the decision, though.
yeah, I think the attitude is they know what they're doing with the left-handers, that they've shown time and time again that they couldn't afford to have a bust. And, you know, as good as Caglione looks, he strikes out a lot, and there is a danger that he won't develop. But with somebody like Hagen Smith, they've done it with Sale, they've done it with Crochet, they're doing it with Noah Schultz. They know what they're doing. And so it's like there's a little bit of safety there, and we know we can get this guy to the majors and be productive.
Dave Scott, you had your hand up earlier, but then it dropped. Do you want to say something? Okay. Okay, then we have our friend Seymour, aka from Minneapolis. Take it away.
Hi. Well, since Richard brought up the name of one of my favorite players, Salvador Perez, a year ago, I keep track of Hall of Fame batteries I've seen, and I've seen a pitcher with a catcher who's in the Hall of Fame, and I've been tracking Zach Greinke and Salvador Perez. And up until this year, every time I'd mention that, I would just get skepticism on Perez. And this included a year ago. In the last couple of years, I've gone down and watched some games in Kansas City, hung out with the official scorers and their stat crew. And even those guys, you know, Perez, geez, you know, I said, well, come on. If Yadier Molina's, you know, talked about that much. At any rate, this year I'm hearing it more. I heard it more when I was in Kansas City. And all of a sudden I'm not the only person talking about Salvador Perez maybe being a good Hall of Fame candidate. Has anything changed? I mean, he's having a good year again, but is he now venerable and they look at it that way? I'm happy to see it. I don't know why in the course of 1 year, other people are talking about it too.
I don't know. I mean, I'm always a fan of putting in guys from the lumber positions who get talked about as great players, but when it comes time for the Hall of Fame, home runs, RBIs, batting average trumps defense every time.
Not with Molina and
well,
Perez,
right,
and
but
Perez has some lumber. He has some lumber
that's
too.
exactly the point. He's an exception, and I'm glad to see it. And I hope other, these catchers are not well represented. At least the really great defensive catchers who weren't really good hitters are not well represented in the Hall, I believe. They played lots of games for a reason, right? It wasn't their bat. Okay, so we're almost at the 1 hour mark. If we don't have anyone who wants to talk about Kansas City, I'm going to suggest we take a little detour and go around the rest of the AL and even venture into NL territory, because there are lots of interesting stories out there, including Ohtani, who I got to see close up in Detroit last weekend, and that was just an amazing thing to watch him. I am not persuaded that he's a unicorn in the sense of that he's doing something that no one else has ever done, because nobody else has ever been able to pitch once a week and play DH. So there's really no comparison between him and Ruth and Bullet Rogan in that, but he is just an amazing guy to watch. I just love it. And I swear there were half the jerseys with names on them at Comerica Park were Ohtani jerseys. People wearing Tigers hats and Ohtani jerseys. So anyone else want to talk about the rest of the AL? Wow, that's dead. There was something earlier I want to pick up on where I think Rich was saying that the Yankees weren't offering much for was it Crochet? Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that's because veteran GMs are willing to challenge the rookie GM and test his
Absolutely.
mettle.
I think that's part of what's going on, that they're trying to figure out if they sense an opportunity, and there's a lot of talk and discussion, with Getz, and a lot of pressure for him to do something. Even, in town, there's a lot of people who it's almost treated like, well, you have to, the attitude is that this is a fluke, that he's not genuinely good. He's going to come back to just being a so-so pitcher. And so you have to trade him now before his value disappears, or before he gets injured again, despite the fact that he's just come back from surgery and in theory should be strong for quite a while. There's the attitude that, oh, you can't pitch him this long, he's going to break down. And the mentality is so pervasive that there's people panic that they won't trade him. And I'm like, I don't know where this is coming from. That, they could keep him, cut down his workload. They can trade him in the fall. They'll still get a ton. They might get more because there might be more teams available to do it. I don't get the panic, but there's panic there. So
Yeah. Well, it makes sense that he's only got 20 major league starts. Is that right?
15 of which
20,
are
I'm sorry.
really, really good.
I'm sorry. He's got 20 starts, but no,
I think it's 20, and 15 of them were really, really good.
Yeah. No, I mean, and he's a kind of risk that teams like the Yankees can certainly afford, because they aren't hobbled by a mistake if they get him and he's only good for, a half season or a year or two. It's not going to cripple their team like it would for a team that doesn't have the resources. Bruce, you have a new comment.
Yeah, talking about Crochet, I think the problem with the Crochet valuation is the injury history. Pitchers these days are getting injured so often. I think the market for starting pitchers like that is not as great as people believe, and certainly not as great as the Sox believe too. They figure the Sox, the idea of trading Crochet is by the time this is such a bad team that by the time the Sox get good, Crochet is going to be out of baseball, or he'd have a sore arm anyway. So it's almost a reflection of how bad the Sox are than any valuation of Crochet.
Interesting. I mean, that's the argument about Tarek Skubal, is like, if the Tigers aren't going to be serious about contending in the next 2 years, trade them now for a bucket of golden prospects, so that when you're serious about contending in 3 years, you have them, and you don't have Skubal, who is demanding a $400 million free agent contract, or who has lost the exceptional peak of excellence he's at now. Personally, I would keep him, because I think it's really disheartening and really fatal to your fan base if you trade your best players when they at the point where the fans are just loving to see them. Imagine if they traded Justin Verlander at this point in his career. Imagine what the fans would have missed. It's not like he's a flash in the pan. It's not like he's on homegrown. He's someone who came from somewhere else. He is the real deal, and he is dominant. And Tigers fans want to see him in the rotation for the next few years. And they're not going to be keen on a bunch of prospects coming back. And I don't know if they'd be keen on even major leaguers coming back, but I don't get paid to do that. And as I said, Scott Harris is exceptionally sharp. Joe.
Well, you brought up the Crochet and the Yankees. As one of the two Yankee fans on the call here tonight, from what I read, and I've been trying to follow this fairly carefully, and again, if you believe the New York writers, etc., that the Yankee front office does have the kind of concerns that Bruce alluded to with Crochet, and not only the injury history, but the number of innings, and how much is he worth to the Yankees. And you can agree or not agree, but the prospect that the Sox have insisted on, the Yankee front office views, is the young next generation Aaron Judge as a left-handed swinger. And he's a big person like Aaron Judge. And I don't think they're willing to take that kind of a risk to get a starting pitcher who may or may not play out for them. And they've had some bad luck in getting starting pitchers that have gone belly up once they got them at the trade deadline. And I think the Yankees have other needs, like maybe a third baseman, maybe a second baseman, maybe a catcher. That they need help in other, maybe a closer. They need help in other areas, they believe, more than another starting pitcher, although they certainly would love to have another starting pitcher. So just a different perspective.
So I didn't get much play on talking about the other divisions, but Gene made a comment in the chat about counting Shohei as an American leaguer. So the All-Star game score was AL8, NL0. I have a question. How many people care about the All-Star game these days? My wife commented to me today that she didn't see me pay any attention to it. And I said, well, I read about it on the web, but I have almost no interest in it. And I used to invite friends over to All-Star game watching parties for years, for decades, really. It was a big deal. And I remember when I had trouble getting a group of people together to watch the All-Star game, I was shocked. But that, I don't know many people who care about the All-Star game. Now all I hear is complaints and talk about the home run derby.
Ditto, and horrible uniforms. We did have 8 to 10 people at a watering hole Tuesday to kind of watch it. You know, it gets us together at least. That's the social part of it now. But no, beyond that, I'm with you, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, I had a front office director of marketing tell me that if it weren't for Skeins, he thought the home run derby would have outrated in terms of TV ratings the game this year.
And I actually think it was a good game. I don't know so much about caring for it, but I still enjoy just watching it. And actually, defensively in that, it actually was very well played. And yeah, but I'm 100, 200, 100% behind the horrible jerseys. I mean, the caps were okay, but you don't need the same uniform. It's not football, it's not basketball, it's not hockey. You don't need to identify who's on your team. Just let people wear their own jerseys. And you want to fiddle with the hat for marketing, fine. But those jerseys were god awful. But the game was okay. And it's still the only, I think it's still the only watchable All-Star game of any of the major sports, because the other sports all require contact for defense, and nobody's going to do that. So hockey, you get no checking, so the goalie has no chance. Basketball, they don't play defense at all. Football, they even gave up on trying to do a football because it's just they used to do it before and take it seriously, but the players are worth too much. There's too much danger of injury. Baseball, you can kind of still play at like 90, 95% without a worry of that injury. But those other sports, no, if you play it seriously, there's a risk there. So the baseball one is still the only one that's remotely watchable.
No, I agree with that. Baseball always had the best All-Star game, partly because of the tradition. But we are a long way away from the days of Pete Rose and Ray Fosse, huh? But it is still watchable. The fact that I don't have any interest doesn't mean that it's not watchable, and it's not an interesting contest, and it still has that long, really richly textured history. I personally am not interested in it, but the interleague play and Bud Selig killed the All-Star game on its tombstone. It'll be interleague play in Commissioner Selig.
No, it's not just that the interleague play has reduced interest. You expand the rosters, got to get everybody in. You don't see the stars if the game's going to be on the line towards the end. The big names are out of it. It's a variety of things, and it just doesn't have the same meaning. As far as the uniforms, Mason Miller comes in for the AL. I see Miller on the back. Well, who the hell's that? Well, if I saw the Oakland jersey, I'd figure it out. I'm a curmudgeon too.
Well, I agree with you. There are other factors. I still think the primary factor is the interleague play, but there are certainly other factors. There are plenty of things wrong with the All-Star game compared to the way it used to be when MLB would justify it in calling it one of its jewel events. Robert. Robert?
Somebody mentioned that the ratings are down from last year. I wonder, does anyone have an idea of what the actual numbers were in terms of viewership?
I didn't see that. Hopefully somebody can look it up here.
The only thing I heard is they said this one did for it was down, but it was up from last year. So this is like the second least watched ever, but it was an improvement over last year's game, I think. So
The All-Star game drew 7.4 million viewers, up 6% from 2023, but the second lowest for the event. The
Yeah.
2022 game in Los Angeles was watched by 7.51 million.
That's still
3.8
terrible.
rating and a 12 share this year, down from 3.912 last year.
Yeah, that's just
Still awful.
terrible. Yep.
Yeah, I
Yep.
was frustrated by the fact that I had the MLB subscription, but I couldn't watch the All-Star game.
huh.
Oh, because it's on Fox, right? Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm going to go to Mark Patterson here because he hasn't spoken yet. Tom, we'll get back to you. And then Tom Bibluski because he hasn't spoken yet.
Thanks, Gary. I was going to say that even within baseball itself, the All-Star game is losing its exclusivity. I mean, the futures game you can make a valid case for, although you're going to see varying levels of play because they're plucking minor leaguers from all four levels. But now that you're kind of shoehorning the draft over 3 days, including All-Star game day, I think that's a bit much. And Hall of Fame induction is Sunday. I think that they sort of need to space a few things out, leave the All-Star game a bit more sacrosanct.
Well, it's certainly, I think, holding the draft where it did is an attempt to prop up the All-Star game, don't you think? I mean, it's probably good for the draft to be associated with the All-Star game, but I think it's really an attempt to prop up the interest in the All-Star game.
My take is that because they're not playing short season leagues anymore, that they can delay the draft since they're just going to, if they get signed, just go to the Florida camps and sort of learn the professional way. But I think it's just too much noise.
Right, and of course, most teams are not going to take a draft pick who's a pitcher and let him pitch after being drafted. So that's a completely different dynamic than it was years ago. But the fact that they could move the draft to the All-Star game doesn't mean it was a good idea, at least in my view, and in yours, right? So, okay, Tom Bibluski, you haven't spoken yet, and then we'll go back to Tom Steich. I hope I'm getting your last name right, Tom.
All right, good
Stitch.
evening, everyone. About the All-Star game, I was somewhat miffed that it's the biggest event of the year for baseball outside of the World Series, and we have an entire week. And then when they brought in some of the great players from Texas, Ferguson, Jenkins, and Nolan Ryan, I was thinking, would it be nice to be able to tie in the induction, the Hall of Fame induction with the All-Star game, rather than having a home run derby and the game, make it an entire week. The players have the week off, no games until Friday, but you could bring the new inductees to the All-Star game, introduce them at that time, rather than the local heroes or some other event that they have. Introduce the Hall of Fame inductees for that year at the All-Star game and tie in the All-Star game more with the Hall of Fame inductees. That's all.
Interesting idea. Well, I mean, the fact that we're even talking about these things tells you how the All-Star game is on life support now. Tom Steich, right? We're gonna go
Yes.
back to you.
Yes. I watch it just for some reason I want to see enough American League wins so that they go ahead in National League in an all-time one-loss series between the two leagues. Because when I first started watching back in the 50s, the American League was ahead, but then the National League had just signed all the black players and got ahead of them in the '60s and what have you. And we try to catch up. It's sort of like I'm still waiting to see when Ohio State catches Michigan in all-time wins between the two football teams.
Well,
Now,
Tom,
with respect to the
the American League
with-
leads a series now 48-44 with 2 ties. I don't
Okay, so
know which year they went ahead, but they are ahead.
Okay, so that's good. The other thought I had, I can't remember, Bud Selig tried to juice up the All-Star by making it that whoever won the All-Star game would get the lead in the World Series. Did anybody do an evaluation to see did the attendance in the All-Star game pick up all those years when whoever won the All-Star game got the home advantage in the World Series?
I'm sure somebody did, but that was such an unpopular idea. I think everyone's forgotten it. I mean, that was
This is where I point out that the Indians never had home field advantage in the postseason. In 54, in 95, in 97, they had home field advantage for the 2016 World Series because the American League won the All-Star game that year, and everybody lost their goddamn minds because the Cubs didn't have home field advantage, and they changed it the next year.
well, the Cubs didn't have home
Well-
field advantage, but they won, right?
Yes.
Another statistic that proves the baseball gods are down on Cleveland ever winning a World Series. In '95, we had the best hitting team, scored the most runs, most walks, fewest strikeouts. But because you had National League umpires giving the Atlanta Braves pitching staff half the opposite batting circle for strikes, we lost. Same thing in '97. The story I heard was that the umpire Greg was mad at the major league umpires. I don't know whether he was going to get fired after the year or something. So he said, "I'm going to fix you." So in the game that the Marlins pitcher pitched and won the World Series MVP against the Braves, pitches in the other batter's box were being called strikes by Greg.
Yeah, that was
And then-
Levon Hernandez you're talking about.
Yeah, Levon
And-
Hernandez.
And that was game 5 of the NLCS against the Braves and Greg Maddux. Yeah, I have to admit, I mean, I know why the strike zone migrated into the opposite batter's box, but I was never a fan of that. I mean, it just looked ridiculous to see pitches. I mean, people say that the strike zone was like 3 inches off the plate, 2-3 inches off the plate, but for the Braves, they expected it to be 6 inches. I mean, I must have watched Bobby Cox and Leo Mazzoni have conniptions. You thought they were going to have an aneurysm when a pitch that was 4 or 5 inches off the plate with Maddux or Glavine pitching wasn't called a strike. They thought it was their God-given right, which is a terrible look for baseball, just a terrible look. And it was all because that they wouldn't call the high strikes, so the umpires gave them the outside to equalize the effect, and it was just a terrible, terrible look. I think it was one of the things that cost a lot of popularity for baseball. Okay, Joe, you got something else to say? You got to unmute, Joe.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on something you said there, Gary, about the variable strike zone. I thought I read yesterday where next spring training, Major League Baseball is going to be trying the robot umpire with the goal of bringing it to the regular season in 2026.
Yeah.
Well, that's the implication. I mean, Manfred didn't make that commitment, but that's the implication.
Yeah.
That will be a C-state change, how that's incorporated, if indeed it is.
Yeah, well, especially since the strike zone is 3-dimensional. As
Yeah.
I understand it, the robot umps are 2-dimensional.
2-dimensional. Yeah, that's the big issue.
That's going to be a huge, huge change, especially for these guys with these explosive breaking balls that have lateral movement. So, yeah. Eric, the funny thing is, Eric Craig was really popular personally in Philadelphia. Everyone liked him. But I read his autobiography. I mean, I'm probably one of 73 people who did. And, you know, his justification for that game is just pathetic. It was just pathetic. So, okay, it's 9:20. We got 10 minutes before we're gonna wrap the meeting up. Want to take looking forward to the second half. We talked about trades, but we didn't make, and we did talk a little bit, I guess, about whether the Guardians are going to win and whether the Twins might pull ahead. Show of hands, or how many people think the Guardians are going to win the division? Actually, I'm trying to get the view here set so I can count them. There we go. So 1, 2, really? Only 3 people? Oh, no, I see people aren't. 4, 5, 6. I got 10 hands up. I'm sure some people aren't voting. How many people? 11. How many people think the Twins are going to pull it out? We got 3 now. 4, Carrie. 5, Eric. 6, Kirk.
Low expectations.
7. If people put their hand up like this, it's harder for me to count. The little yellow hands are easier to see. So 7 or 8. How about the Royals? Anyone have faith the Royals could pull it out? I see no takers. Tigers? I see no takers. Even my eternally optimistic friend, Mark. Where do you think the Tigers are going to finish, Mark?
Yeah. 4th if they're lucky, you know.
You don't think they're going to trade Scooble, do you?
I don't, but I think it's a mistake if they trade Flaherty. They should lock him up for a long-term deal, at least the kind that they gave Kenta Maeda, who's kind of petering out.
Kind of petering out is generous, although he did have a really good relief appearance against the Dodgers. That's something, but not much. Oh, I didn't mark. You said Eric Gregg's son is PR director for the Phillies?
Yes.
I did not know that. I was friends with Larry Shank when I was in Philadelphia, and for years after. Larry's retired now, but he was for many years the dean of the PR guys. He started with the Phillies in '64, if you can imagine that. I haven't talked to him in a few years. I think he's still head of the Phillies alumni group. He's a great guy. He was a great guy.
64 would be a baptism by fire for him.
Well, I think he wasn't. I think he was an intern then. But I mean, that was his first season with the team. Okay, and who did I miss? Oh, the White Sox. Is anyone going to stick up their hand for the White Sox? Yeah. White Sox. Well, I think, I mean, I didn't put my hand up, but I think the Guardians are the clear favorites. I'm just I've already said this, I so admire Cleveland. 12 years ago, when I was on the SABR board, I have to remember how long ago it was now, I had a conversation with someone in the Cleveland front office, and he said, this is probably more like 14 years ago, and he said that they were terrified that the Tigers would spend stupid, essentially. Remember when the Phillies owner said a few years ago he's going to spend money, even stupid money, and that the Indians thought they could cope with anything in the division except the Tigers under Illett spending stupid money and overwhelming things. And of course, it got the Tigers to...
Which is kind of what they did.
Well, it got them to one World Series, which they were humiliated by the Giants. The other one was a fluke. The 06 one wasn't stupid money. It was just the vagaries of the postseason and short series. But I admire the Indians. It's good to hear from Joe that attendance is up, because I remember what it was like when the Indians were setting consecutive game sellout record, and what the Jake was such a great ballpark to go to. And in recent years, I haven't visited a lot, but I get there every 2 or 3 years, and it seemed very sad that so many empty seats and not nearly the level of enthusiasm.
It's back this year.
They have actually
that's great to hear.
significantly decreased capacity. When
Right.
Jacobs Field opened, it was about 44,000. I think they got up to about 46,000 a couple of years later. Now it's down to, I think, about 33,000,
Yep,
but
yep,
what
32,
they've been
33.
doing is they have been turning it into kind of like an entertainment venue. They've got
Yeah.
a couple of plazas, party plazas up on the upper level. In fact, the one in right field has contributed to a conspiracy theory that one of the reasons the Guardians are hitting better this year is because there's a wind tunnel effect out to right field. But they have the corner bar in the right field corner, and they actually started selling, I think it was last year, $50 monthly passes, which gets you a standing room ticket to every game
That's
a month,
becoming
and it is
very
proven to be
popular in a lot of parks.
it is
Yeah.
proven
A
to be
lot of
very
cities,
popular
that's
in
becoming
Cleveland.
very.
They're selling out every
Yeah.
month. The Guardians are selling out those allotments every
Yeah.
month.
Because I mean, you got to make it where it's a destination for something. You know, the baseball game, yes, but there's other things you can do, not just the baseball game.
Right, and plus with the per caps, I mean, what they call the per cap in the business,
Yeah.
the amount of money they make on concessions and stuff, it actually makes sense to sell a cheap ticket and get you in the ballpark because you can still make a lot of money on people in the ballpark selling them beer and caps and food and all that. And you know, and
Cleveland
why
has
not?
really tapped into, there's a very vibrant craft beer scene in Cleveland, and they've really tapped into that,
Yeah.
so to speak, at the ballpark. You can get, your standard retinue of macro brews, but you can get Fatheads and Great Lakes and Market Garden and Masthead and a bunch of, local breweries products.
Maybe we can do a $10 beer night.
Yeah.
As opposed
They're
to
all
10
$10
cents. Yeah.
now.
It probably, yeah. But like even at in Chicago at the cell guaranteed rate field, we still do get crowds at times, who come just for some of the other stuff besides the baseball, including, this year a lot of people think the most valuable, the MVP, most valuable performer on the White Sox has been the Campfire Milkshake. This thing that just drew crowds.
I've heard about this.
It's great. It's like
Well, I think the most important metric for interest and enthusiasm in the Guardians is the order in which local sports are talked about on the various stations. Typically, this time of the year, no matter what the day is, the first conversations about the Browns, even though there's nothing going on other than training camp coming. And oh, by the way, the Guardians. It's not that way this year. There's genuine enthusiasm and priority for the Guardians. And then, oh, by the way, the Browns. That will change, but that I think is a good metric that shows the general enthusiasm throughout the community for the team.
Yeah, that's important. Detroit is a great sports city and it's a great baseball city. But when the Lions were the bottom feeders of the league, which they have been for so often and in recent years, of course, until last year, I was appalled that you could turn on the rights holder station an hour before the game, and they'd be talking in August or September when the Tigers were headed to the postseason and therefore had a chance to go to the World Series and had big time marketable stars. I mean, big time stars, right? Scherzer and Verlander and Cabrera and that. And you turn it on the rights holder station an hour, even 40 minutes before the game, and the talk was football. And if it wasn't Lions football, it was Michigan football. And if it wasn't Michigan football, it was Michigan State football, and it was just appalling. But that is how much the NFL is the King Kong of the sports scene, the professional sports scene, and how much football in general has seized the country. I used to say that if you want to understand to people who don't know how popular baseball was before World War II or before 1960, I used to say, you want to get some idea, look at how popular the NFL is now, and that's how popular baseball was back then. Now I don't even think that's fair. I don't think baseball was ever as popular in the sports universe once you had competition as the NFL is now. Mm-hmm. And if you combine college football with the NFL and you just football versus baseball, it's just astounding. Okay, it's 9:30, folks. Hey. I'm going to wrap this up. If anyone has something they have to say, please say it immediately. Otherwise, I thank you all for participating. I see many of my friends on the thing. I will work on getting a Kansas City rep here next time so we have more insight into Kansas City. I'm disappointed in that. I hope to see you all in a postseason chat. And we'll see how the Guardians or the Twins will do in October.
Yep.
Mark, do you have something to say or just, okay?
This is Richard. I just wanted to say one final thing. Nobody ever mentioned it, but I think one of the surprises for the division is just it's not the worst division in baseball this year.
Oh, right.
It's improved.
Absolutely.
Even despite the White Sox, it's like, the rest of the division has been more than respectable. I think that's something to cheer.
That's right. Yeah. Very
Yeah.
good.
Yep, that's
Right,
a good
Richard.
point. Thank you for mentioning that, Rich.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna kill the chat. Thank you all. We'll look forward to talking to you again.
Take care.
at the
Bye
end of the
all.
season.
Bye. Baseball.